here with USA Rugby head coach Scott Lawrence to talk about the new law trials for the MLR 2025 season. As ever, Scott, thanks so much for your time on this. Really interesting summary of laws. So I guess before we kind of delve into anything, as we said just when we were chatting offline there, no secret, it's about speeding up the game. So when you look at all those variations, kind of delving into it, which one sticks out to you the most as a law that you could see potentially working its way into maybe the test arena down the line?
Um, I think the one around the mall being an unsuccessful mall turning into a free kick is interesting, right? It came out of Georgia, and where there was incredibly low ball in play, and so it was actually a trial that occurred there, and then is now being it sounds like there was a conversation there with the MLR, and they decided to take that on. So I think that one is an interesting one. I think the others are all, the forward pass into the try zone and all that. I think those are interesting. I don't think there's a lot of friction around those. I think that, the free kick around the mall changes the game a little bit. I think, and so it'll be an interesting one around international coaches and how receptive they would be to that one. So I don't know if I answered your question about the one that'll go forward with World Rugby. I don't know. What I do know is that nothing is inevitable around the timeline you think it is around these things. So, but I'd say that one probably has the biggest impact strategically at the international level for me.
Yeah, it is. It makes a lot of sense. I mean, I guess you hear it every match. I mean, use it, use it, use it, and then the ball stays in the maul for another 20 seconds at times, 20 seconds, and it kills it. And I guess obviously if you've got all the forwards locked in, if you can get the free kick going quickly and playing, it's a huge amount of space. What kind of stands out to me quite a lot is obviously the restarted um, with the kickoff in terms of when the ball goes into the in goal with the goal line dropout. That's really become an extra set piece in a way
Yeah,
across the board.
yeah,
So
yeah.
from your standpoint as a coach, is there elements of that of where obviously if the ball goes into the in goal line, I'm not sure how quickly things are accelerating, but how quickly you can get into a shape on that and then play off those phases. Is that becoming more and more of a focus when you do get together in camp, or is it a case of, there's three or four real options, just play off that?
Yeah, I think on receiving a goal line dropout is uh it's like an extra kick receipt where you're playing in their half, right? So that's the way you kind of think about it um is in that way, and you can assign roles and responsibilities around where it's going to be. The question is you never know where it's going to be kicked, right? So you kind of have to have general principles around where you want the ball to be within one or two phases, and then what do you want to run off of that, and what players do you have on feet, and et cetera. So it is something that's spent a lot of time on. I think it was more prevalent early when there was just a default kick it long next to a touch line, and then so you could come up with a predictable way in which to attack back with that. But we've seen in some of the games globally recently that, they're becoming shorter, they're becoming more attacking, they're going to different locations, to give an advantage to the kick chase and the defense. So yeah, it is something you spend time on.
Yeah, no, brilliant. Really interesting. I guess just kind of rolling through all of these to make sure that we touch on them. Obviously, the no scrum option from a knock on or forward throw into touch is very interesting too. Obviously, you can only
Yeah.
now go for the line out option on that side of things. Again, another reset in play. There's obviously always going to be with ones like this in particular, it becomes a bit contentious with removing the scrum as a sort of obstacle. you can see feedback of people saying, "Oh, is it just becoming rugby league, removing the need for the scrum?" But obviously, it's
Yeah.
no secret how much quicker, especially with that new law about the line out needing to be completed in 30 seconds, that the line out is going to be
Yeah.
a bigger option. And you, like you said before,
Yeah.
you can set up them all. How do you view that rule change across the board?
I'm actually kind of indifferent to it. I think these things, like when we think about these things, we think about the probability of occurrence in a game and then how much time do you spend on them. And those things are really occur infrequently in the course of a game. So changing it from a scrum to a line out, yeah, on the whole, probably doesn't have a material impact on the number of scrums or lineouts. It's probably in terms of number. That's the difference. I keep coming back to these ones that are around the end goal and around the turnover at maul because these are high pressure game defining moments in a test match where you have to defend a maul, you successfully defend that maul. Now you've got to lock down a scrum and exit from your own goal line, right? And those are pressure situations that are occurring. So if we look at the way that US players are being prepared, they're not getting those pressure situations that are going to occur in test matches in their professional play, right? So it's not about the number of scrums that occur in the game. I think there's a lower number of scrums anyway because there's higher skill level at test rugby, and forward pass or knock-on advantage is gone away very, very quickly. Right. So what we've seen is if you look at the first two rounds of Major League Rugby, is the referees are probably playing too much knock-on advantage and then coming back for the scrum. So just get in line with the rest of the world if you want to reduce scrums and keep more turnover and transition play and going. I think you can do that. But test match rugby, the scrum is a strategic piece of the game. And when you have an advantage, you'll probably try to press your advantage. You'll take another scrum when you get a penalty because it may lead to a card. And or you can continue to apply pressure when a team's trying to exit and you want to ruin. So that exit off a scrum. If you get a scrum that's in the midfield, a center scrum in any part of your opposition's half is a scoring opportunity. So these are like pressure game defining moments in test rugby. So if these law changes translate into test rugby, we'll be prepared. But I think the probability of that is probably low, and so we got to figure out different ways to put that pressure on them.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. I mean, it's it's both sides of the coin, as you say, and again, so from your perspective as the US coach, do you feel like that's putting your players on a bit of a back foot? That's another thing that you need to then take into account
Yeah.
without putting you too much on the
Yeah.
spot, sort of. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we did some recent analysis and we looked at the density of scrums and the tactics used against us last year, the teams that did not come, that we played against, particularly in the PNC. And the fact that you couldn't reset a scrum off a pen or the number of restarts of a scrum, when we looked at it, there wasn't more scrums in the test match, but they were used density, hold it in for a long period of time, take the scrum down, make a scrum again, understanding that the forwards wouldn't have the robustness to be able to do that at the test level twice in a row, which had an impact on the game. So we look at the impact of those, those law changes in 23 and 24, and we felt like it had a material impact, particularly in the Samoa result in the PNC. So we've got to put mitigation strategies in our national team efforts, to work around these changes and the impact they have on our performance at the test level.
Is I know it's a tricky one again. Is there a potential to be able to discuss this with the MLR? I mean, we've seen World Rugby changing laws throughout the season. I mean, if it's not necessarily yielding the results that they perhaps thought it might anyway, and it's detrimental to the US national team, and it could be said to the Canadian national team with the amount of Canadian players playing there, is there a discussion to be had around that?
I think so. I mean, I think we were quite surprised. We read the law changes on social media like everyone else. And so I think going forward, I think it's imperative that we have partnership and there's an openness from the MLR to discuss these with us, and we talk about the test level implications of it.
It's interesting because it doesn't feel like a uniquely sort of US issue, right? I mean, it kind of feels like law changes are being politicized, right? There's always a different push and pull depending on what you want. I mean, the biggest one at the moment is the 20-minute red card. And
Yeah.
the prime example of for the negative side of things is this weekend's match between Ireland and Wales. You know, Gary Ringrose's red card, Bundy Aki comes on, Aki changes the game. Not saying Aki
Yeah.
doesn't do that in replacement of Mac Hansen, but it's a lot easier, as you know, with the 15 players. Now that's I would say from my perspective anyway, from what I can see, is being driven primarily by the Southern Hemisphere wanting the 20-minute to keep the game up and things like that. So that's
Yeah.
obviously something that the MLR have adopted too with the 20-minute red card. It just feels a bit
Yeah.
odd that there isn't alignment across the board, right, on when we're implementing law changes. So with the MLR trying to adjust the law, do you think it's a unique thing in that they're trying to obviously just capture a US audience to keep the tempo up and make it almost slightly easier to understand by removing one of the technical elements of the scrum? Is that something we could?
Uh, No, I think it's a really valid question, and I think you have to think about the American audience a
Mhm.
little bit. So when um, when people come in from outside the United States and then begin to administer the game in the United States, they think that what will drive more Americans in is changing the game of rugby. And that's a misnomer. Americans, what they know about rugby is a scrum. That's about the only thing they know.
Sure.
That's the start of the conversation. So, and we're used to stop start sports and baseball. If you want to watch paint dry, go to a Major League Baseball game,
I've had
right?
that joy, yeah.
Um, yeah, or an NBA game is stop start or NFL. The number of cycles is quite high, right? These are very stop start sports. So rugby is already a continuous sport that people are interested in. And their first rugby and rugby experiences after that, they're very excited by because it is continuous play and it's contact sport and et cetera. So I think it's maybe a little bit misguided in thinking that you have to change the game to cater to the American audience. I think. Back to your question on the 20-minute red card is there was almost a foregone conclusion when it was a full red card, right? So we were going through as a sport, we were going through this lowering of the tackle height and the contact rules around head contact, and a red card was was really game changing. It's almost you could predict the result on a tier one game if that occurred, right? But the thing about the 20-minute red card is that we're seeing now that the team that receives the red card is winning the games 50% of the time. So now you're getting what you really want, right? You want parity, you want close games, you want an equal opportunity for both teams to win. And that's what drives really good sport and really good viewing. So from that perspective, I think it's a positive. Um, I think we have to be careful that the focus on the tackle doesn't remain, doesn't slip, right? Because the severity of the penalty drove a lot of time and attention to making sure your tackle height was correct and et cetera in the training environment. But that might potentially be the only downside of it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it was I think Sam Warburton this week was actually discussing very much that point, like you were saying, the element around concussion. I don't really, I always try and steer clear of this because it's just, it's such a complex issue and there's people far more qualified than myself to be discussing.
Yeah.
But the issue comes in around poor tackle technique, that you getting the shoulder on the wrong side, getting your head on the wrong side, going with the wrong shoulder, things like that. So it is interesting that you touch on that as a coach. At the lower levels, I guess is where the concern comes in for, I guess, the two main unions who opposed it were the Irish and French unions, right? And I guess the argument could be at lower levels, does the tackle technique coaching drop because the severity is not as high? And, people aren't focusing on it as much. Personally, I don't buy into that. I don't see coaches. If you're a
Yeah,
coach, you should be teaching correct tackle technique irrespective.
yeah,
But
yeah,
and I think there's also a misconception that the 80-minute red card's gone because it's not. It's very serious acts of foul play will still result in a sending off. I've gone
yeah,
back and forth on this, as you can probably already tell, Scott, on where I
yeah.
stand. But
No, it's great. It's a really really interesting way to think about it. And uh, the model that's in the United States is we have different laws or rules of the game for different levels.
mhm.
So we're used to having different levels. Rugby, it was always a what we're doing at the international level is being pushed down to the U12s in terms of consistency. And maybe it's time to evaluate that. And I think it can be done on a union by union level with law variations, and it has been, and things like that. But I think there's ways to influence behavior at different ages through the laws of the game. And yeah, it's different when you play high school gridiron here to college, and then when you go to to the NFL, it's different. And there's reasons for that.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I always find the American football concept super interesting. I mean, even things like the kickoff, where they'll trial it in college football or whatever
Yeah,
various second league that is around at that point, and
yeah,
then it goes to the NFL, which is
yeah,
makes a lot of sense from that point. I'm kind of don't want to go completely away from the MLR. I just kind of wanted to finish on the sort of final point of the ball being played within 5 seconds, which in theory should be across the board, right? Because that's what the directive is to referees. How frequently that is being implemented is debatable. I think you could say
yeah,
across the board,
yeah,
and for the refs, I don't envy their job at all. It's already challenging enough. I think that's a good rule. Personally, you don't want the ball stuck in the ruck, but at certain
yeah.
points, does that then negate? Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it actually enhances poaching. What do you see around that side of things? Is there a more of a is that implementing more of a strategy for the opposition to just completely mess up the ruck as much as possible to try to stop the attacking team having the 5 second opportunity, and how do the refs handle that?
Yeah, no, I agree with you. The referee's job is becoming really, really difficult. And we experienced this in the 2024 test season, and it was the law changes were coming at us, and we had, you have 2 to 3 training sessions to implement a law variation. I imagine referees, having to commit that to the mental map. It's really, really tough for them. So I'm really empathetic towards the referees in this. It's becoming a difficult game to referee. Uh, and so I think the impact I think it's a positive, first of all. Let's speed up the game. Let's, remove some of these things. Defensively, I think, and in terms of the breakdown and some of the things, there are certainly some changes in tactics. There's also changes in the way that teams set up kicking going forward and exit strategies and et cetera that are key. It will come down in some cases to an individual referee decision in terms of when is the ball actually available and when does the 5 seconds start.
Well, that's that's
And
that's the
now
challenge.
that's where it's in the detail, right? And that's where it comes down to teams being really clued into how the referee that they're going to have on the weekend sees that, and the way the way that it occurs, and that might, possibly change some breakdown tactics
For
from
sure.
there.
I think the biggest thing for me personally that I find quite amusing is almost the caterpillar system, right? To allow space for the nine to box kick without pressure. And I think in
Yeah,
particular, the biggest one that comes to mind was South Africa, England in the most recent November series. Even Etzebeth, I think, got 2 charge downs, and it could have been Franco
yeah,
Mostert with another one on Jack Van
yeah,
Poortvliet, which
yeah.
has heavily impacted Van Poortvliet being picked for England recently. Should there be more of a directive around that in terms of really tightening that up and going, look, you get one body in there rather than trying to get two or three, and
Yeah.
how can you change that?
Yeah. I'm not sure at this point. I'm not sure it's worth the rub.
Mhm.
to have the referees, change numbers in there or anything like that. I think the removal of the blocking player who's just off the side of the ruck in front of the nine has had more to do with charge downs than the actual length of the caterpillar itself or etc. So I think that's quite interesting. And there's a risk reward. The no, more number of players that you put into that caterpillar, the less you have on feet for a chase, right? So when you put it all together and you say we're now, not allowing shielding around the catcher. And so we're creating more contests in the air. If you want to win the scraps and take advantage of that, then you want more numbers on feet. So, there's always the balance of how many do you put in there? Um, what are you trying to achieve? Where you're at on the field with the kick and et cetera. But I probably wouldn't go along the route of policing it anymore. They're making them use it quickly, and from my perspective, the nines are getting better at it, and their skill set is improving in terms of being able to execute it quickly.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, there was some fantastic. I mean, I'm just going recency bias. I mean, you look at the distance Gibson Park and DuPont in the most
Yeah,
recent round had getting the kick away, which is quite interesting because it kind of leads me to the next point. If you don't mind us just having a quick touch on the
yeah,
World Rugby law changes
yeah,
too, on that, where you've got an opponent isn't allowed to play the ball player or the who should in theory be the nine clearing the ball within 1 meter. Now, I know there was quite a bit of pushback from players like Ty Byrne and guys who are experts at absolutely wrecking the Nine's life around
yeah,
the breakdown. How have you seen that implement? Do you think that, I mean, it all ties in together, right? It kind of ties into the same with the Nines not getting in the way of the scrum, not being able to get a right at the feet of the eight and things like that. I guess all
yeah.
the laws kind of tie in together. Do you think that's been a net positive from what you've seen so far?
I don't know if it's a net positive yet or not. I will say that it's maybe increased the the competition at the breakdown,
Mhm.
if that makes sense. So I think the way that teams are now disrupting are quite different. Like if you go back a couple of months and you look at the Leinster La Rochelle game, and then you look at the number of breakdowns and the way they were competing, and the way that there were initial rucks won and then ruck shifts before the ball's passed, and the way breakdown pressure is being applied, I think that's really it's changed some tactics there and put more um, more importance, I guess, on the way that you can test at the breakdown, and the more bites at the apple you might take in order to disrupt that pass.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I should have clarified as a back rower. I'm sure it's and would have been a nightmare for you, but it's not getting to scrag the
Yeah,
nine as much as you wanted. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah,
Sorry about that. Yeah, then the other one that's kind of really caught the eye, obviously, has been the line out throwing. Now, personally, I'm not sure how I feel about that. I understand speeding up the game and things like that, but you think about,
yeah,
and it wasn't exclusively a hooker throwing into the line out. You've had wingers and people like that before, and in
yeah,
a couple of years, Josh van der Flier had to do it for Ireland against Scotland.
yeah.
Um, are we trying in a bid to speed the game up, perhaps negating skill development in certain positions? Are we risking losing certain parts of the sport by allowing a skew throw in if a team's not contesting? And again, going back to the referee element of it, how much pressure are we putting on referees? Because a team just has to get a body in the air, right, to kind of make it a skew throw. So yeah, well, I'd love to hear your
Yeah.
thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think I don't know what it does on skill pressure. Again, this is probably an infrequent thing. That's occurring usually close to the try line when you're going to set up a maul where it might come in. So most teams will get someone up in the air in other parts of the field, that's for sure. So um, I think it has the potential to maybe open up the maul a little bit where teams can't stay down
Mhm.
or shouldn't stay down. I mean, if you're going to catch, if you're smart about it, you'll actually your throw will be in a position to set you up into the maul in a more advantageous way. if you know that they're not going to go up.
Mm.
But the hooker doesn't know if the opposition is going to jump or not. So, he's got to throw. He's got to throw, in a skilled way anyway, in my opinion. So, overall, it probably a net positive. How many times have you been frustrated by just let him play? It wasn't even contested,
Yeah.
just let him play.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have certainly been on the side of that.
Yeah,
And I guess it's kind of talking about slight frustrations, and I'm hesitant to delve too deep into this, but some of the feedback that I've seen in comment sections and just chatting to other journalists and coaches and people like that is sort of the input of the TMO at this stage across the board. Now, the TMO is obviously, personally, I believe, very much a net positive overall, but we're starting to see a lot of plays being called back where there's, a very marginal forward pass, things like that. And I'm sure there is a very clear directive on how far a TMO can go back, but it feels like it varies from the outside in. Is there an element of we're talking about speeding up the game? All these laws are coming in.
yeah,
In your opinion, do you think there's scope for the TMO not necessarily to have less of an influence, but to be, I don't know, maybe less for referees perhaps being less reliant or referees being able to only call in the TMO rather than the TMO offering feedback there and then? And I'd love to hear what you think about that. And
yeah. I mean, I think what it is introduces a technology component into the game, if
Mhm.
this makes sense, which is another area for risk. So if your technology is slow, how many times have you seen the ref? I can't hear you. I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
Mm.
Right. And the game is actually slowing down from that. So I think from a just an overall kind of execution standpoint, having another set of eyes is a good thing. Making sure that the to your point, the communication when the TMO is used. So is the TMO trying to call the game for the referee and just putting it in his ear based on video or called in at certain times? I think that's a worthwhile discussion. I think also it's the implementation of TMO has to be really good for it to work from a technology and a workflow perspective and the number of views given to the TMO. I think we've seen in the last couple of weeks, try is scored, kick is converted, the team's lining up to kick off, and then there's a TMO check.
Mm.
And then we go right back down, and now it's a penalty
Yeah.
down at the other end, right? And you're 4 or 5 minutes of broadcast time elapsed. Um, that's when it starts to have a negative impact on the overall product, I think, for fans and the audience.
Yeah, I fundamentally agree on that. And I mean, I think it literally happened this weekend and just gone in the Six Nations where I might have been an Irish try or an English try, but one of them was conversions kicked, everything's done, and then suddenly you hear the TMO, actually, you might want to go back and look at this. I guess I understand the removal of human element and the pressure on referees and things like that,
Yeah,
yeah, I agree with you. It would be interesting to see if we could perhaps just go, look, at what point are we calling this? If the conversion's kicked, that's generally been that, and most fans from the outside have got their head around a try has been scored, and
yeah,
you might nitpick it a bit later, which is interesting, which is
yeah,
actually really kind of leads us on to that final sort of MLR law change about the conversions under the post. Now
yeah,
that one really caught my eye, and again you might disagree with me. Is that now perhaps going away from the product and removing an element of jeopardy, right? So, you know,
yeah,
pressure does funny things to different people, right? If you might
yeah,
say a kicker is guaranteed to nail one from under the post, but as we've all seen it before where they don't,
yeah,
and it's a 6 point game, and then suddenly a team scores under the post. That law,
yeah.
that full law felt funny to me. I'd love to know what you think about that, Scott.
I think it's had zero to no impact on the
Okay,
game. What teams are doing is scoring right outside the post.
sure.
So the kick is occurring anyway. I think they just need to look at it. I mean, that's what you do. You put something in and you see if it works, and it's not. I don't think it's having the impact, uh, you know, that they're having. It's not putting 60 seconds back into the game like we think. I think the teams just score right outside the post, and the kick happens anyway.
Yeah,
So
fair, fair.
yeah,
Actually, Scottish fans would love to have had the Duan van der Merwe try a little bit closer to the post, but
yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
fascinating. But yeah, no,
Yeah,
I actually what I really like about your answer there is you're right. You have to try things to see how it goes. And
yeah,
I know World Rugby came in for a little bit of criticism of changing laws halfway through this season, and you know for teams
yeah,
it's a bit tricky, but I guess you got to give it a
yeah,
full season to run through that. And again, I guess this is where we're talking about alignment. I mean, World Rugby want the conversions quicker anyway. You know, you've got the 60 seconds now
yeah,
from when the try scored,
yeah,
which
yeah,
is fascinating because I guess, you know, a 10 could be at the whim of, you know, if the ball's stuck at the bottom of a rock and it's taking time and time and
yeah,
time. It's yeah,
yeah,
interesting. But I also
yeah,
do enjoy your point there of it's not necessarily putting the 60 seconds back into the game, and at
yeah,
some point the ball and play time is going to be at its maximum, right? We're already over 2 minutes up on the World Cup. Players can
yeah,
only do so much, but
yeah. Absolutely. And there's a welfare component to players and an accuracy component, I think, around the ball and play. You know, we want it to be high, but I think there's probably a limit to that, and we need to be careful of chasing that as the only metric
yeah,
that we're after in terms of the game and the product. Um, but yeah, I think the shot clock is fantastic. Did your point around jeopardy and suspense and whatever? I mean, it is. I mean, it puts an element of pressure back on the kicker. He's got to check the clock and yeah, it's great. We've had play clocks and shot clocks here for a very long time in the US. So
sure.
it's fun to see.
Yeah, no, I do love it in the NFL with the you can see the time kicking down, the quarterback clapping to get the ball out
Yeah,
is
yeah,
fantastic. So it's yeah, it's cool. And I know from a neutral standpoint, being around English fans, they were pulling their hair out as Finn Smith kicked the ball over for the conversion
yeah,
with
yeah,
time remaining. So
yeah,
really
yeah,
interesting. Thank you so much for all your feedback on that on that, Scott. I think it's super interesting. I do love that. Obviously the mole one I think is fascinating, like you said. I think it's just the user call. We hear it all the time, and it doesn't actually
yeah,
translate. So if refs are a bit stricter on that, I could certainly see that working across the board. Um,
yeah,
Before I let you go, obviously we touched on it just before. A huge year for USA Rugby this year. 11 tests, as you've touched on, and
yeah,
without, like you've said before, jumping off the paper, Scotland and England, which is great. So, in
yeah.
the build up to that and PNC and things like that, have you how many sort of alignment camps have you got lined up? Are you allowed to sort of discuss that, and how does that look in line with the MLR in terms of getting players from the clubs and over
Yeah.
players?
Yeah, I think we're incredibly grateful to the MLR in terms of altering their season to finish at the end of June, which I think gives, US, Canadian, and some South American players the test season to focus on. So I think that alignment has been quite good. With that, there's a condensed schedule that happens and midweek games, and there's a lot of things that have come through on that. So it's a long way of saying most of our stuff is virtual. We'll get together here in the May timeframe, do some alignment work together. But I think the way that our season works when it's shortened, there's less need to get together because it's quite dense for the players anyway. And what I found is you can get together 3 months before you really truly get together, and they just forget everything because they have to go back and use the same terminology and do the same things they do in their club every day anyway. So we like to think about, just in time information approach and how we do it.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Nice and concise. And then just one final piece on this, just because obviously for our audience in terms of the US, could you clarify exactly what the US needs to do to qualify for Rugby World Cup 2027 and how that looks? Because on the European side of things, Rugby Europe, they've already got the teams qualified in terms of
Yep.
Georgia and Portugal. So what's the US's path to the World Cup?
It goes through the PNC. Japan and Fiji are already qualified. So what that means is that there are 6 teams in the PNC, and the top five in the PNC will go through to World Cup qualification. If that doesn't happen, then the to be decided opponent out of South America, there'll be a home and away series right at the end of that tournament. Again, another qualification chance. And if it doesn't happen there, then there's a repechage in November. So lots of chances to get there, and and it's good to see these other teams qualified. Really happy for Spain that they got qualification. I know they've qualified a couple times and then had that pulled off the table for them, but we'll be playing them again this summer. But really happy for them that they've already qualified, and hopefully we can join them.
That's fantastic. Scott Lawrence, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it, and best of luck for the season ahead, which is,
Thank
yeah,
you.
always great to chat to you.